You're watching Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old time and bluegrass music. For some reason or other, I've always loved this tune, and it's a pretty common one in the world of American folk music. And it's one of those tunes that beginning musicians usually learn at the early stages. The melody is simple, and it's easy to get those notes in your head. And it's been covered by a lot of well-known acts, including Crooked Still, the Lonesome River Band, the Nashville Bluegrass Band, and even Tony Furtado. Well, in this video, we're going to explore where this tune actually came from. And if you're like me, you'll discover that the answer may not be as straightforward as you think. It's a tune history shrouded in a bit of mystery and a lot of question marks. So let's just dive in. Our story begins with this man, Stephen Collins Foster, referred to by some as the father of American music. And he is best remembered for his popular songs like "Oh Susanna," "My Old Kentucky Home," "Swanee River," and "Camptown Races." He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1826 on the 4th of July, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He was the son of William Foster, a prominent political figure in Pennsylvania. Stephen was the 10th of 11 children, but because his little brother died in infancy, he grew up the youngest in the family. Now, growing up, he taught himself many musical instruments, including clarinet, guitar, flute, and piano. When he was just 9 years old, Stephen joined a group with some other neighborhood boys that would perform early minstrel songs that were popular during the 1830s and 40s, including Coal Black Rose and Zip Coon. And you can watch my video on Turkey in the Straw for more info on that one. And the little group proved a hit with the locals, and Stephen made enough money from these performances to buy tickets to the local theater on Saturday nights. And some of these genres he encountered at the theater included the European-style operas, which would later influence his own musical compositions. When he was only 14 years old, Stephen composed his first song, which has since been lost. And when he was 18, he published his first song. It was a sentimental piece entitled "Open Thy Lattice Love," which you're listening to right now. Now, much of the historical information on Foster has been lost, but there are some accounts of his siblings that we still have that paints a picture of Stephen as a bit of a dreamer, obsessed with playing and writing music. One of his brothers later recounted that Stephen would sit at home in the evening at the piano and improvise by the hour, creating these beautiful strains of melodies and harmonies which he didn't even write down, but just let them float away like, quote, "beautiful flowers cast upon the floating water." And at times, he said, he could see tears streaming down his cheeks as he sang away. His first songs were mainly sentimental ballads known as parlor songs. But as the 1840s went on, he also experimented with composing some tunes in the newer minstrel style as well. And in 1847, he would write a minstrel song that would become a well-known classic, called "Oh Susanna." And in 1850, while he continued to write parlor songs, he also formed a partnership with one Edwin Christie of the Christie Minstrels. This was a popular minstrel band at the time, and they were known for toning down some of that more bawdy aspect of minstrelsy in an effort to broaden its appeal to a wider audience. And so Foster began composing these minstrel songs with a slightly more sentimental side to them. And on February 19th of 1850, Foster wrote a song about a horse racing track called "Camptown Races." Now, even though this song became one of Foster's most famous and is still known 150 years later by pretty much everyone, it was only just moderately successful at the time. And because of its sillier lyrics that don't really have a clear narrative, it's sometimes referred to by some scholars as a, quote, "nonsense song." Well, less than a month after Camptown Races was published, Foster wrote another typical minstrel song on March 18th of that year, It was called, Angelina Baker. The song is about a tall, pretty slave woman of the title's name, who steals the narrator's heart until one day she disappears from the plantation, leaving him all alone and heartbroken. Now, the song was never a big hit at the time, and in the course of 7 years, it netted him a total of $17. Well, here's a version of Stephen Foster's Angelina Baker, and see if you can recognize the melody of the modern version of Angeline the Baker. I'll play them both back to back for comparison.
Way down on the old plantation, that's where I was born. I used to beat the whole creation, hoeing in the corn. Angelina Baker's gone. She left me here to weep a tear and beat on the old jawbone.
Angelina Baker, Angelina Baker, Angelina Baker, Angelina Baker.
Okay, so if you're like me and you assume that our modern version of Angeline was just directly based on this original piece, well, you're left kind of scratching your head. I mean, there are parts that kind of sound similar, but the similarity is a lot weaker than I assumed. And before I even started researching this tune in depth, I already knew that Stephen Foster was the composer, and I thought to myself, well, this song would be a cakewalk and make for a nice, easy video. Well, I was wrong. Because Foster's version doesn't really give us a final answer to the source of the tune that we know so well. If anything, it almost feels like a dead end. Or does it? Well, the answer to this question is shrouded in a lot of mystery. But I was able to dig up a clue to link this song up with our modern version, and it's found with this almost forgotten man from Virginia, who was born some 25 years after Foster wrote his song. So let's follow this breadcrumb.
Angeline the Baker lives in a village green. The way I always loved her beats all you ever seen.
You're listening to a 1928 recording of Angeline the Baker by Uncle Eck Dunford. Now, there aren't many detailed records about this man, but the few accounts that do exist paint a picture of a man with a rich personality. Born Alex Dunford on May 30th, 1875 in Ballard Branch near Galax, Virginia, Uncle Eck developed a reputation as something of a local eccentric. He reportedly wore a heavy overcoat and overboots year-round, regardless of the weather, and he would add along some pink earmuffs when winter finally arrived. He also spoke in a peculiar voice, often described as having a certain Scots-Irish accent. Known for his humor, he set himself apart in the Galax community by frequently quoting Shakespeare and Robert Burns and reciting long comic monologues. Around the turn of the 20th century, Uncle Eck built a little cabin in Galax consisting of a single large room with a kitchen attached at the rear, and he lived there his whole life. After he passed away in 1953, numerous glass plate negatives were discovered inside this cabin, along with a tripod and other photographic equipment. Sadly, many of these images have since been lost, but we do have a couple that I'll show you. As an amateur photographer, he appeared to focus on documenting everyday life in Galax, though it's unclear whether he intended to sell his photographs or simply pursue the craft for his own enjoyment. At least two of his images gain wider recognition. A photograph of a logging crew was used on a county record label, and another, depicting several Galax musicians, appeared on the cover of the New Lost City Ramblers songbook by Mike Seeger and John Cohen. In addition to photography, he also worked as a cobbler, where a Singer leather sewing machine was also found in his cabin later on. And despite these various jobs, Uncle Eck is best remembered for his music. He was a gifted fiddler, guitarist, and storyteller. He collaborated with many musicians and groups of the time, but he's most well known for his work with Ernest Pop Stoneman, and he further cemented that connection when he married a relative of Stoneman's wife named Callie Frost. His first recording session took place in 1927 at the now famous Bristol Sessions, where he sang and or played on multiple tracks in different Stoneman configurations. And for those of you not familiar with it, the Bristol Sessions were also where the world was first introduced to some big early country music acts, including Jimmy Rogers and the Carter Family. He also recorded 2 solo pieces that year, the Whippoorwill Song and Skip to My Lou My Darling, which went down in the history books as this tune's first ever commercial recording. A portrait believed by some to be a self-portrait shows him with his instruments here, including a guitar he purchased from Sears Roebuck in 1912, and it was the one used on most of his recordings. Well, his talents impressed the famous record producer Ralph Peer, who invited him to Atlanta later in 1927 to record some of his comic monologues. And later the next year, in October of 28, he returned to Bristol with the Stonemans to record Going Up the Mountain After Liquor, another track that prominently showcased his comic flair. Here's a recording of that track.
You know Bill loves his dram. Just give him some liquor and a plug of tobacco, and all Bill wants is a half-acre ground to spit on.
On this track, Stoneman served as a certain type of audience prompt, laughing at each of Uncle Eck's jokes, which in turn has led some historians to label Stoneman the first ever inventor of the modern-day laugh track. So now we know who to blame for all those annoying laugh tracks. But Uncle Eck also recorded 2 solo tunes at the sessions in 1928. One tune called Old Shoes and Leggings, which later was included in Harry Smith's famous anthology of American folk music. And the second one, entitled Angeline the Baker, which you're listening to right now. Now, here's a melody we can recognize. Maybe a little bit slower than the version you're used to hearing, but here it is nonetheless. A lot more familiar than Foster's number. However, we are still left with something of a mystery. While Uncle Eck's lyrics resemble those of Stephen Foster's earlier composition, they're not identical by any stretch. Foster's version centers on a slave woman named Angelina with the last name of Baker, whereas Uncle Eck's version tells of a woman named Angeline who happens to be a baker. In both songs, the narrator suffers heartbreak, but beyond that, these similarities largely fade. So the question arises, where did Uncle Eck's song even come from? And what, if anything, does it even have to do with Foster's version? So I couldn't find any documentation about where Uncle Eck may have gotten this song, and whether he even composed it or borrowed it from a pre-existing source. But there are some theories out there. And one theory is that Uncle Eck's Angeline may have been a song that was meant as a parody of Foster's. Now, most parodies are kind of like spoofs that ride the popularity of the original version. They usually have a one-to-one correspondence with the source tune and the words, but Uncle Eck's Angeline is more like a recomposition of Foster's song. And whoever may have originally composed it used only small parts of the original melody and lyrics. So maybe it's not a parody after all. And we'll circle back to another theory that may connect the 2 tunes, but first we need to discuss the even bigger mystery here. And what makes this tune so mysterious is the fact that it's not like a lot of the tunes I cover on this channel. You see, usually in researching a tune, I'll find maybe a dozen or a half dozen old-time recordings from the 1920s. And then usually there's a little gap during the Depression and World War II, but then I'll start finding the tune popping up again in the late 40s, usually with some field recordings. And then it just kind of increases and snowballs with the folk revival and the rise of bluegrass in the 50s and 60s. But Angeline doesn't follow this path. I mean, here we have one single recording of the song by Uncle Eck from 1928, and then total silence for like a half century. And then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the tune starts popping up again, like a flood, everywhere. I mean, this isn't some esoteric tune from East Missouri that no one's heard of. This is Angeline the doggone Baker. It's a standard. Everyone knows this one. So, what gives? Well, I was able to turn up a little clue that may help clear up some of the mystery. It's found with one of the earliest recordings we have of Angeline during the start of its big revival into prominence in the 1970s. It's an album entitled The New Golden Ring, 5 Days Singing Volume 2 Folk Legacy, and it was released in 1971. And in the liner notes about its second track on Angeline the Baker, it claims that, quote, this song is an old Eck Dunford tune with possible African-American origins. Frank George, the fiddler from West Virginia, calls it Angeline and gives it Scottish overtones. But in some parts of West Virginia, it's called Angeline Baker, thus causing some friction between fiddlers when it's played. And here's the little clue. The liner notes go on to state that the tune was played only as an instrumental, and that the lyrics are actually a more recent addition by Uncle Eck. And finally, it also claims that the Stephen Foster song called Angelina Baker may have come from this older fiddle version. Or perhaps it's the other way around, and the fiddle version somehow came from the Foster version. Well, folks, either way, it's a compelling case. Maybe Angeline the Baker was primarily an old fiddle instrumental tune until some lyrics were added later on, and Uncle Eck eventually recorded it in the 1920s. And I guess that it's also possible that this original fiddle tune was mainly confined to an area of West Virginia until the 1970s, when it finally emerged and hit the national stage to eventually become a standard. But it still doesn't really explain that large gap in the records. I mean, there are a lot of tunes that were buried in pockets of Appalachia until music collectors started turning up with their field recording equipment in the 40s and 50s. But why can't we find a single commercial or field recording of this tune for like 50 years? And like so many other old-time numbers, it doesn't even at least turn up on any documentation of song lists or fiddling contests during this period either. There's no documentation whatsoever. So why the long stretch of silence? Well, maybe there's no gap at all. Maybe this whole time we've just been looking for the wrong horse. So there is another theory, folks, and one that actually seems to fill in our missing part of the story. You see, right in the middle of this so-called gap between Uncle Eck's recording in the 20s and the song's big revival in the 70s, I did come across a recording that may be the missing link. And the reason why I didn't find it at first was, well, it's a tune with a completely different name. Some researchers believe that what they call the revival version of Angeline, commonly played today, finds its source from an old Virginia tune called Coon Dog, not to be confused with Old Coon Dog. And we can actually find a recording of this tune right in the middle of our gap of silence in 1948. And it was made by a fiddler of the name of J.W. Babe Spangler of Patrick County, Virginia. And it does sound surprisingly a lot like Angeline the Baker. And I'll play a recording so you can listen to it for yourselves. But first, let's see who this Babe Spangler even is. Now, because of his popular radio broadcasts during the 1920s and early 30s, J.W. Spangler was one of the era's most influential fiddlers at the time. John Wallace Babe Spangler was born in Meadows of Dan in Patrick County, Virginia, on November 15, 1882. He came from the legendary Spangler clan of fiddlers and statesmen from Floyd and Patrick counties of southwest Virginia. Now, even though J.W. learned to play music from his father, Wallace, who was known as a fiddling legend throughout the region, he actually didn't start playing seriously until he was in his late 30s. When he was 24 years old, J.W. moved to Richmond in 1906. His first job was as a guard at the state penitentiary, a position he held for about 15 years until a serious eye condition impaired his sight. So he started working in the grocery and lumber businesses while also continuing to play music. In 1925, a local radio station signed him on the air, and by about 1927, Spangler started performing on the radio where he led a string band and was known as the Old Virginia Fiddler. His broadcasts were featured on a radio program which was heard every night at 11 p.m. This was one of those clear channel stations, and so Spangler's blend of traditional fiddle tunes, sentimental songs, and popular instrumentals could be heard up and down large parts of the East Coast. So it was in 1929 when some OK Records scouts came to Richmond looking to record some local talent, that Spangler was a natural choice. He recorded 4 sides in October 14th, but only 2 were released, including this one, Patrick County Blues. J.W., along with his brothers, continued to perform on the radio and at live performances in Richmond, where they were called the Spangler Brothers. And in 1948 or 49, J.W. recorded again, this time in Mount Airy, North Carolina, for the purposes of documenting his music. And included on this recording is his version of the song that sounds remarkably a lot like Angeline the Baker. Again, the tune is called Coon Dog. Give it a listen. Well, this very recording would later be released in 1977 by County Records, and many music researchers believe that this tune may have been the original source of the revival version of Angeline we know of today. And it does kind of make sense, because both Uncle Eck and J.W. Spangler are from the same general area of Southwest Virginia. So it is likely that this fiddle tune was shared by both artists. Now, the question of which Angeline came first, this instrumental version, Uncle Eck's version, or even Foster's version, remains a bit of a mystery. And any true actual connections between these various versions may just be lost in the mists of time. But what a lot of researchers do believe is that our modern version of Angeline finds its true source in Coon Dog. And they go on to state that it was possibly picked up from some Spangler brother performance, or maybe from the radio show, or maybe it was just picked up at one of those Galax festivals, and that it eventually spread throughout the country, becoming the standard we know of today. And music researchers actually dub our modern revival version of Angeline the, quote, festival version, to differentiate it with the Foster version. So again, folks, it's just a theory, but it does make a bit of sense. And it kind of explains that 40-year gap, because maybe there is no gap, maybe the tune was there all along. We just couldn't find it under the name Angelina the Baker, because it was called Coon Dog. Well, before I leave you folks, I should just mention whatever happened with Uncle Eck. After the recording of Angeline the Baker, Uncle Eck went on and continued to play fiddle and guitar with other local groups in the 1920s and 30s, including the Bog Trotters and the Grayson County Rail Splitters. And there might have been more acts he was part of that he might not even been listed on. Well, Uncle Eck would pass away in 1953 on June 26 at the age of 78. And we have one account of one Oscar Hall, who was an organizer for the Galax Old Fiddlers Convention, who knew Uncle Eck in his later years. His wife's parents were family friends, and they took care of him until the day he passed away. And Mr. Hall recounts that towards the end of his life, Uncle Eck was still playing his guitar and playing it pretty well, and he even got the chance to play with him sometimes too. And he said that when Uncle Eck would visit his wife's parents, there was also a certain goose around that took a certain liking to the old man. Mr. Hall recounts that sometimes after his visits, when Uncle Eck started to head back home and make his way over the hill to his cabin, this goose would go along with him too, and follow him all the way back home. Once the two arrived at Eck's cabin, the goose would then stretch out its wings and fly back. Well, folks, that's all I got on Angeline the Baker. Hope you enjoyed this one, and once again, thanks for listening.